Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video I'm going to be painting up a couple of different schemes on the new plastic Fire Dragon miniature. Now Games Workshop sent us these through for review, and you may have seen last week Andy was painting up some warp spiders for his army, and a few years ago when they redid the plastic Guardians I painted up a ton of different Craft World tutorials as well, which I'll make sure I link to. I thoroughly enjoy painting Eldar. I think they're a brilliant army to do army painting with, by which I mean focusing on a few standout areas, what's really going to catch your eye on the table, and then just being as efficient as possible with everything else so that you can get a great looking army on the table in a decent amount of time. So let's paint. So just before we jump into the paint itself, I wanted to quickly run through how I deal with quite a common problem you may come up against with a lot of the Eldar kits, in that the join line for their shoulder pads tends to run directly down the centre of them. And normally you put a nice blob of plastic glue on there, and when you squeeze the two pieces together, that will spill out through the gap, and then you can either file that off or sand it down, however you like to work. But sometimes you're going to forget to do that, like I have in this case, and this is how I deal with it. So I just do a little bit of sanding across the join to create a little bit of sort of dust, as it were, of the plastic. Then I use Tamiya extra thin plastic glue, wipe that over the top. Once that's dried, sand that back down, and I think you get a perfectly decent smooth join between the two. Certainly good enough for army painting. I wouldn't let it derail me and grab all the putty and the filler and all the rest of it out. So just a quick fix. And it's something I do very, very, very regularly. Now let's move on to the armour. So for me, much like Marines, getting the armour colour right on Eldar is 90+% of the work for the vast majority of the miniatures. For the various schemes we're going to do here, so for the orange and for the yellow, I'm going to pre-shade it using a pink and a white. So I'm using Screamer Pink here. I've thinned this about 3 drops of thinner to paint, just normal airbrush thinner. I'm spraying 20 to 25 psi using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, and this is in one of our Cult of Paint Harder and Steenbeck Infinities. Now I've over thinned it here. You can see as it's going on, this is too thin. I'm being stubborn and just persisting with it. But if I was batch painting a whole unit or something, I would just add a bit more paint into the mix there. You'll notice I had primed the model a light colour. I'd used a Wraithbone, I think it was, by Games Workshop. You can see the difference here. The helmet on the left primed with the Wraithbone, and the helmet on the right primed with Chaos Black. Exactly the same paint mix put over them, max out the same amount of layers, and you can see the difference having that white primer makes. And I wanted a nice, vibrant start to this paint job, so hence why I've used the white primer, and hence why I'm using a pink in the shadows. In the past, I might have used browns or oranges and things like that, but I really, really like the pink in the shadows when you paint orange and yellow. Now, because the heads are different colours on these models, I have chosen to paint them separately, but for the pre-shade stage, I always try and have the model as complete as possible, just so that I can match up any light sources that I try to or decide to apply to the miniature. Now, for the pre-shade, I'm going to use Tamiya XF2 flat white. We need to use Tamiya thinners, so X20A thinners with Tamiya's acrylic paints, because they're made slightly differently to most of our other water-based acrylic paints. Other than that, we treat them exactly the same. But the reason I love to use Tamiya is I can thin it right the way down, so probably 4 drops of thinner to paint here, which means I get a very, very see-through paint as I'm spraying it on. So as I build it up over whatever colour I've got underneath, I can create all these lovely tones through from pure pink through to pure white and everything in between. I've tried a loads of different whites for pre-shade, and this is the one I keep coming back to just because it allows me to maintain a great degree of control, even when it's very heavily diluted. And the nice matte finish it gives you means that the paint, when you spray over the top, it takes the paint really, really well. So that's why you'll always see me, or nearly always see me, use something like Tamiya flat white for a pre-shade. And with regards to a light source, kind of going fairly simple, top down and a little bit to the side. Just if you move it just off to the side slightly with your miniatures, it allows you to get some quite fun areas of light and dark contrast, which tend to look really sort of quite exciting on the tabletop. You don't worry about having the whole squad have exactly the same light source either. Just make the individual minis look cool. It's fine, unless you're doing it as a display piece where they all need to line up exactly the same. It's fine. Just pick what's the cool angle for the model itself. Now for the orange, I've got Orange Fire here. The New Game Air is absolutely fine. It's the same name, very, very similar colour. Now I tried out Gryph Hound Orange on its own on the left here as we look at the Terminator, and I felt it was just a little bit too dark, not quite exciting enough. So I did a little mixture of 2 drops of the Fire Orange to 1 drop of the Gryph Hound, and I think it gives a much more interesting orange. We get a ton more tones going through the over the pre-shade as well by doing it that way. Contrast paints are incredible, but they're quite dominating. They can obliterate what's underneath if you're not careful. So just a little drop in there did the job. So with that mixture again, I've thinned it roughly 50-50 with thinner, and I'm just going to apply it, build it up in a few layers. I think I did about 4 in the end. Now, just wanted to take a second to say thank you to everybody that supports us over on Patreon. If you enjoy your Eldar stuff, then Andy has got a load of videos over on Patreon of his own Eldar army. Some of those are on YouTube, but most of them are over on Patreon. And he's working at the minute on this amazing conversion or sort of reposing of the new Warp Spiders Phoenix Lord. And it's going to be a great big video on there where he covers all the sculpting, all of the painting on that for his what he does for his army. So if you like more in-depth, generally display level tutorials, consider going and checking out Patreon. All of the support we get over there allows us to keep going as Cult and do everything we're doing. So we really, really appreciate it. If for any reason you can't support us on Patreon, then click the like button, hit subscribe, make a comment, all the rest of it. Those make a huge difference as well. So as I said, I put about 3 or 4 coats of the orange on here. I find, particularly with contrast paint, it's important to let the layers dry because they do dry sort of a little bit more solid, for want of a better term. I really should use a better term there, between them. So you think it's not quite dark enough, then it dries and you go, oh, actually, that's perfectly good. And all I would do is if I was painting this for an army is I would make sure I was noting down the exact dilutions in my notebook and also the amount of coats of paint I was applying to get the colour. And then for the yellow on the head, I'm just going to pick one of my favourite super bright, vibrant yellows, Imperial Fist here. And this is just going to go over the same pre-shade. So again, thinned it about 50-50 with normal airbrush thinner. I'm using Vallejo airbrush thinner at the moment, but generally it's just whatever my local store has got in. And I find I never have an issue just using Vallejo or Life Colour with most of my ranges of paints that I like to use in the airbrush. But yeah, it's a brilliant scheme. Like the what they call aspect warriors. Just yeah, wonderful way to get a bit more colour into it. And I wanted to do an alternate scheme just because I think it's cool. So I chose to do the black and orange scheme. And here over the black primer, I'm just giving it a base coat of black paint. That's so I can do any touch-ups if I make mistakes later. I know it will match the paint that I'm going to use. But also because I popped the head in for the pre-shade, I obviously needed to make sure I black that back out underneath. And for the highlight colour, I chose to do a sort of greeny blue black on this model. So I've mixed together, as you see there, Incubi Darkness with the black to create my highlight. I just think this works really nice, particularly next to the orange. And I'm doing a very simple highlight, much less severe than I did, for instance, with the pre-shade with the flat white. But this is absolutely fine. I think we'll sell this model as black easily at the end, and the fewer steps it takes, the better. But just in case I felt I went too broad with any of those highlights, I'm just going to take a little bit of black contrast paint here, Black Legion, excuse me, and just spray it from below just so that the deepest shadows are as pure black as I can get them, just to make sure that we know it's not looking like a dark green miniature. It is looking like a black model. And then it was a case of just sort of blacking out the details, things like the guns. There's so little on these models that isn't the armour. It just doesn't take much time at all. I think if Andy wasn't such a huge Eldar fan, and obviously he likes to do it all, I really think I'd have done a project with the Eldar because since they've started redoing the miniatures, I just think they're incredible. So yeah, if you like your Eldar, I'm really happy for you that you're getting all these models because they're wonderful. They build so quick, they paint so nicely, and what a great opportunity just to do a bunch of different colours. And then for things like the face plates, which are going to be a different colour, I'm just going in here and painting the white one white. When I paint something white, I tend to not use pure white. So here I've just used Ulthuan Grey Air. It reads as white on the model, and it also means that later if I want to add a highlight to it, I could use pure white if I wanted to. So I've just gone in there and used that to base coat the white. Black, again, just use whatever black paint you like. And then for the reds that's on the model, I'm just going to do a simple 2-paint recipe. I'm going to use Khorne Red, and then I'm going to use Mephiston Red to highlight that up with. To say, for me, when it's army painting, I like to focus on a couple of areas to really sort of sell. and then try and keep everything else just as simple as possible. So lots of go-to recipes that are in my painting book, just that I know work nicely. And for instance, Khorne and then Mephiston, I know gives us a fairly boring red. I know they cover nicely. I know I can get them easily at the shop. It's you know, it's a no-brainer in my opinion with it. And for the highlights, I'm just sort of scratching and dashing the highlights on the metal bits, or metal, not metal, wraithbone. I don't know what they make their guns out of actually. I think it used to be that they didn't make anything out of, or much out of metal, wasn't it? It used to all be wraithbone, but I don't know if that's still the case. But yeah, and for the leather, again, a go-to recipe, Thondir here and Mournfang. And the reason I've chosen that one, again, is that orange in the Mournfang I thought would be nice next to the orange in the armour. And again, it's taking seconds. I've chosen to black out those areas of leather before painting them brown, just because I think it provides a nice sort of additional little bit of separation between the parts, so a bit of extra shading. And again, it takes, you know, all of a minute on the model. Now, recently I mentioned in another video I'd picked up a bunch of paints because I fancied trying a few different things. And it didn't go terribly well in that video, in the Empire one. But one of the paints I picked up was Balthasar Gold. This is the first time trying it out on these guys, and I love it. I think it must have been out a fair old while, but it's the first time I picked it up. And yeah, big fan. This is going to feature quite heavily, I think, in a lot of upcoming videos. I just love the tone of it. I needed 2 coats of this to get a smooth finish on there. Like, coverage wasn't incredible, but yeah, just a lovely finish and lovely colour. Really like it. So yeah, that's going to be featuring a fair bit more. Then it's a case of just jumping on and doing the decals. I'll link a video up in the top dedicated to doing decals. But with these guys, they have their little rune on their helmet, which is on that transfer sheet that comes in the boxes. Once the decals and everything was done, I decided to do the oil stage, because most of the parts of the model now have at the very least a base coat on, or they're basically complete base coats and highlights and all the rest of it. So I thought doing a unifying oil wash here to add a bunch of weathering, a little bit more shading, was the right stage to do it at. I'm not giving it a heavy gloss coat, it's literally just 1 spray of that varnish. This is simply because I would like the oil paint to sit more into the recesses than stain the surfaces. It's got nothing to do with protecting the paintwork underneath or anything like that. It's just going to help the oil move around a little easier, say, into those recesses. And if I need to do any cleanup, it's going to make that a little easier as well to wipe the oil off a slightly glossy surface. For the colour, again, I felt I'd been using sepia a lot recently, so I fancied something different. So I grabbed Bitume, which is this sort of dark purpley brown. Wasn't quite dark enough on the test model I did, so I've just added in a little dot of black here to push it a little further. Now, I'm mixing my oil paints up here, or thinning them down rather, with mineral spirits. We call them white spirits here in the UK. And for this video, I'm just using one that I picked up down at my local DIY store. When I'm working on my own projects and relaxing and painting a lot of models at the same time, I will use an artist grade odorless mineral spirit. I use something called Sansador by Winsor and Newton. It does delay the drying time a little bit, which isn't always ideal, but it doesn't smell horrible. That's why I like using it. But for full transparency, for the videos, generally you'll see me just using, fairly cheap white spirit. And I just test it out on a little bit of plastic first to check the consistency. You can see there actually it's quite a thick wash. So I'm glad I glossed the surface, because it means I'm going to get nice and dark in the recesses, but also if it does stay on any of those flat surfaces that I don't want it to, it will stain them, but I'm going to be able to wipe that off nice and easily because of that gloss coat underneath. So you can see I'm being sort of a little bit tentative at the beginning, just trying it in a few of the recesses, checking it's all okay. And once I was more comfortable with it, I started to apply it to the whole model. But what I would try to make sure I would do is every time I would finish my brushstroke, I would finish it in a recess so that the majority of the pigment is going to be deposited in that recess. I've tried to leave lots of footage in this video. I feel when there's so few parts to painting the model, it's probably more useful to leave plenty of that work in. And I applied this to the entire model, so all the black parts, all the metal parts, all the armour, everything on the model. But as you can see, I'm not just slopping it on, I'm taking my time. And it just means that when it comes to doing cleanup work later, there will be very little, if any, of it to do. And also it just helps, know that I don't miss any areas. That means I don't apply a lot more in one area than another. Just try and relax. But again, that's another reason why having an odorless one is really helpful, because, I'm not doing this as a super quick stage. I'm concentrating and relaxing and just getting it done. Now, I left it to dry overnight. Different oils, different thinners will have different drying times. But this is overnight. It was touch dry, quick blast with a hairdryer, and it was absolutely fine. Then I've got a very, very soft brush here with the tiniest bit of clean mineral spirits on it. So it's just sort of damp. It's not wet with it at all, but just enough to help remove any oil where I don't want it. You might see people using cotton buds or cotton swabs or anything like that. Go for it, whatever you like to use. But generally I will use a soft brush like this, because not only does it help me remove stuff, it can also just help me sort of smoosh the oil around a bit and create a few blends here and there if I want to. And if you find that you're pushing against the oil and it's not moving at all, don't push harder. Just damp the brush a little bit, pop a little bit of the thinner on there, activate the oil, and then you'll be able to move it. And once I was happy with all of that, I gave the model just a quick coat of matte varnish. So similar to that sort of dusting of gloss I gave it, I'm just giving it a dusting of matte varnish here. And this is simply because I want to paint some more over the top of this now. And painting over a glossy surface is often quite tricky. The paint rubs off really easy, or it doesn't come off the brush so nicely. So just a little matte dusting, just so the paint will stay where I put it. We'll do varnishing later for the actual finish of the model. Now, I just want to do a little bit of sort of tippy-tappy chips here and there, sort of edge highlighting, sort of battle damage, sort of both. And at the bare minimum, I would do around the area of the head. So I would do the helmet, I would do the collar, I would do the shoulder pads. That would be my bare minimum. But particularly with something like an Eldar army as well, you're only going to be painting 5, maybe 10 fire dragons, I'm guessing. So for me, like spending an extra 2-3 minutes a model to do a little bit more chips and a little bit more highlights over the rest of it, I think is absolutely worth it. So for the orange, I just used Fire Dragon Bright. I'm really glad it worked, because I love using paints with the names for the things I'm painting. And it looked great. For the black, I've made a mix-up using the Ulthuan Grey Air, the black, and the Incubi Darkness, essentially to create a sort of grey-green colour to do the highlight. Just the Incubi and the Ulthuan Grey were too bright, so I mixed in a little bit of the black just to darken it down. And then for the yellow areas, I've just used flash kits, because I actually don't have that many yellow paints. So I possibly would have preferred a slightly warmer yellow than that, but it did the job. It's absolutely fine. It's army painting, right? Let's not stress about it. And speaking about not stressing about it, the lenses, the way the lenses are sculpted, eye lenses are sculpted on the newer Eldar miniatures, is an absolute dream to paint. All I'm doing here is just filling them in with white. I've chosen to use fairly dilute white paint here. Something like white ink would be a brilliant product to use for this as well, simply because it would just wash into those what are effectively recesses really, really easily, and just wick off the end of your brush, give you a nice sort of solid white to work over. And then I just wanted to use a contrast paint to do the lens, and I thought, oh, red will look cool. Grabbed Baal Red. It's actually very, very pink, but I don't hate that at all, particularly with that nice callback to the sort of pinky magenta colour we've got in the shadows. And I've got this on my wet palette. I haven't diluted it at all. It's just sat on my wet palette, and I'm just applying it in like you would with contrast paint. Again, trying to finish the brushstroke in the recess, so the majority of the paint is deposited there. And then I've mixed just a little bit of the Ulthuan Grey Air into it, or white, whatever you've got on the palette. And I'm just going to do a highlight in the middle of the lenses. Done. And then lastly anyway, we'll find out in a minute, gems. These guys are festooned in them, certainly a lot more than on the aspect, the Guardians. Again, army painting, let's keep it simple on our troops. So we're going to do sort of a 3-step gem here. So if our gem is this oval shape like we have here, imagine it's obviously base coated black as it is on our model. We're going to follow the shape of the gem and cover a good 3/4, 4/5, 80%, whatever you want to call it, majority of the model with our gem colour, so a darker blue here in this case, and we'd leave that little bit of black would be showing through up in the corner there. Then we're going to get a much lighter colour of the blue, so if it's blue like this, we'll choose a brighter blue, and in the opposite corner, as it were, or opposite to where the little shape of your black part is, you're going to do a larger, brighter coloured shape like that. So in this case, sort of a crescent shape, and then Once you're happy with that, we put a little dot of white into the black, which suggests that little bit of sort of reflective surface. Job done. You could spend ages if you want blending between the two blues. You could add other blues in there. You could add secondary highlights and all the rest of it. But when the gems are this tiny, and there's this many of them on the models, there's like 5 on these, then for me, keeping it simple is the way to go. So on with the dark blue. Leave the black in the corner. On with the light blue. This is all real time. You see, we're using such little paint, such a small area. It's drying almost instantly. Little white dot in the opposite corner. And we are good to go. And you're going to be able to moat around your miniatures doing like that. Personally, I like to add a little drop of gloss varnish. I haven't on these actually, but usually I do a drop of gloss varnish on any gems I paint. I really like how it looks in the hand. It doesn't photograph as nicely, but I really like how it looks. And here we'll do it on this guy. We'll just do it the opposite way around, so as if the light is coming from the top right as we're looking at it this time. So the little black part is going to be up in that top right corner. So the darker blue, the lighter blue, and all I would say here is pick whatever colours you like, but just make sure you have a really nice big step between the darker colour and the brighter colour. There's no point being too subtle with this. Little white dot there. And if for any reason you feel like the gem isn't looking sort of gemmy enough and looking reflective enough, quite often I find this is because you haven't got a nice black border around it. Maybe you've gone over there a little bit with the blue or whatever, and you've sort of killed the black recess that's around the stone. So if you do get that, just pop in with your black paint, use black wash, do whatever you want. I've just got black paint here, and just make sure you've got that nice black outline all the way around it. So it'll just help sell that shape a little bit more for what it is. So now we're going to varnish the model for the finish. So I've popped my basing powder on there, my basing texture paint on there. I do this before I do the powder stage because it would just blow it all off. And I've chosen to use a Lucky MIG matte varnish here. It's matte, it's not particularly matte, it's quite a nice satin finish actually. I really like it on my gaming miniatures. And I've given that a couple of coats following the manufacturer's instructions. And then the last step actually is to just go in and highlight the metals. And the reason I've chosen to do this after the varnish is just so that they've got a nice bit of shine on them. Will it mean they're delicate? Does it mean it will rub off? Yeah, maybe, but I really don't care. I don't think it's it's not important to me if that happens. I don't think it will be an issue, and I would prefer to have this nice little metallic shine on there. So I've used another new metal I've picked up here, Fulgurite Copper. Again, first time I tried it was on the miniature. As you're seeing here, absolutely in love with this combo. Definitely going to work and tweak it for some future projects. And there we go. That's both of them done. I've just done my normal basing that you've seen me do on loads of Kill Team videos, and I'll pop a link up there how we do this type of basing. If you want to have a go, it's one of our favourite ways of sort of doing army painting basing, simple but effective. And I guess that's the take home for all of it. None of the steps that we've done here have really been more than 3 stages, something like that. But I think we have some really eye-catching, sort of impactful models that at no point were stressful to paint, which I think is really important. And more than that, I would say they were constantly fun to paint. The shapes on there are so nicely realised. Colours are nice and vibrant, so they're fun to play around with. Everything is defined. You know exactly what you're painting on the model. There's no real ambiguity and stuff. So yeah, just absolutely wonderful miniatures. I'm really chuffed for you guys that are into your Eldar. I think this latest wave you're getting is just further pushed that range into the top tier of armies that you can get model wise for 40k. So if you have any questions about anything I've done in here, pop them down in the comments and I will get back to you as soon as I can. If I've remembered, I will pop up and create an Eldar playlist so you can go and check out all the other Eldar videos we've done over the years. And as I say, if you're a real Eldar fan, you want to go and check out Andy's stuff over on Patreon. He's got a wonderful army. He's got some amazing tutorials on there about things like his Farseer. I think he's got an Autarch on there he's done. Obviously, you've got the various different aspect warriors and things as well. So if you're an Eldar fan, it's well worth, checking out. So thank you so much for all of your support, both here and on Patreon. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you've liked any of the models in this video and you fancy having an army of them yourself, but perhaps you don't have the time or wherewithal to get it done, consider dropping us an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com, and maybe Ben can sort you out.